Okay, now we come to the meat of the program in terms of our qualifying speaker, and that is important. Why I twisted so many qualified speakers into making sure they made it here to hear this particular speech and make their decision about how well they think he did. I'm not going to say a whole lot about an introduction to Al Batinga's qualifying speech, except to say that he has spoken to this organization on other occasions. In fact, he went all the way to number 2 this year in the International Speech Contest for District 12. And a year ago, he was at the International Convention seeking the opportunity to be able to go on the stage and didn't make it, but he got further than I ever got. So that's a statement right there. Our speaker tonight, candidate for qualifying speech, looking for your vote. All right, we're ready to go. Here we go. Al Batinga. And what do you do with failure? Right.
Yes.
I think I got that right.
Let me introduce you to a 5-year-old boy. At 5 years old, his dad died. He had 2 younger siblings. And so by the time he was 10 at 6th grade, he had to drop out of school so he could fend for the family. And he started taking up odd jobs just to help. So without a dad, 2 younger siblings, and a very industrious mom who worked and worked and worked, he took up the mantle of the man of the house. And he started experimenting with jobs. And he took jobs as an insurance sales guy, believe it or not, when he was very young. He started selling tires. He even went into the military at 16, faked his birth certificate, and they found out 4 months later and kicked him out. So he went through a myriad of all kinds of jobs, all kinds of things, and failure after failure after failure, making some money, helping out the family, but he continued his failure. Now, about 40 years old, so you're fast forwarding a big group of years, he found his calling. And it was to go to a gas station in Corbin, Kentucky. And then in the back of the gas station, he started a little kitchen. And he started feeding hungry travelers. And all of a sudden it blossomed. And he says, this is it. Out of all the things I've done, this is it. So he ventured out and he started a restaurant with his idea. And you can probably guess who I'm talking about. It's the chicken guy, Colonel Sanders, at 40 years old, started this. And within a few years, he started flourishing and things were going well. Unfortunately, they built this thing called a freeway, and it bypassed Corbin. And he lost the business because no more traffic were stopping by because they bypassed his little city of Corbin. So now by this time, he's 65 years old. And some people were saying, you know, just give it up. You're 65, you're living off of Social Security, $100 a month. Just go with that. And he said, no. There's something more I need to do. And so he got out there and he got his pressure cooker. And he got a bag of spices. And he got into his car and he waved goodbye to his family. He had 2 grown children. And he says, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to figure out a way to make this happen. So he went to one person and he knocked and he said, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Restaurateur, here's what I want to do with you. I just want to cook up some chicken. You bring me the chicken. I'm going to cook it up. I'm going to give you the best recipe you've ever had. Best chicken in the west of the Mississippi. And all I'm going to do is take a few pennies off of what we can sell together. And the first person said, huh? Never heard of that. No. Next person. No. 100 no's, 200 no's, 500 no's. And I often wonder at about this time, Al, would you have stayed with it if you believed in this idea, all of us, if we had believed in a particular idea? After 500 no's, would we have stayed with it? Colonel Sanders did. 600, 700, 1,009 no's. Can you imagine that? Living in his car, pressure cooker, spices, going from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant, finding rejection throughout. Speakers Bureau, Toastmasters, honored guests. I want to entertain looking at failure in a totally different way. There's three things that Colonel Sanders does, and several of the other people I'm going to talk about does too. Number one, they look at failure in a different way. They actually understand that success is built on failure. Success is built on failure. It's a necessity. And Colonel Sanders actually has said, every no, can you imagine that? 1,009 no's brought me closer to a yes. Phenomenal, instructive thought. And he said, a no is just a stepping stone toward yes. So he accepted failure. Number two, he embraced failure. It was like he looked at it and said, this is part and parcel of what I need to do. And he embraced failure. So not only did he accept it and say, okay, I'm going to get some failures, he embraced it. He looked after it. He looked for the failures. And then number three, they use it as a learning tool. Every failure helps you. You learn a much, much more from failure than you do from success. And so Colonel Sanders, at about 72 years old, 72 years young, sold his franchise idea to an organization that bought it. And until he was almost 90 years old, he was the brand ambassador. He traveled 250 days a year at 88, representing Colonel Sanders. So I want to explore with you, when's your last gut-wrenching failure? When did that happen? When was your last failure where you looked at it, it took the wind out of you, it took the sails out of you, you sat back and you said, wow. When was your last failure? And I want to challenge you, because failure is actually good. And if we can change our mindset overall, we can learn so much. So if you think about, how about that speech you wanted to give that you didn't give? How about that office that you wanted to run for? How about that person that was in the audience that you got to know, but you wanted to have some coffee with, but you never went after it simply because you were afraid? I was afraid of failure. So failure comes in many, many ways, and I'll define that. Failure is simple, not meeting a goal. So if I say I'm going to lose 5 pounds this month and I lose 4, I failed. Now, I know you and I can argue about it, and you can talk about semantics, and you can talk about never using the word failure. I heard all that, studied all of that. I understand it. To look at failure in a good, positive way is helpful and supportive. But for us, just for the few minutes I'm here, I want to do black and white, off and on, 1 or a 0. Failure is just failing to meet that stated goal and objective. That club you wanted to bring up to presidents, that member you wanted to add to your organization. Finding that failure on a regular basis is actually a good thing. The best leader I ever worked for, his name was Ross Perot. How many of you know who that is? All right, most people over 40 will remember him. He actually built 2 billion-dollar organizations. He ran for president twice in the 90s. He has the highest vote, highest popular vote of any nonpartisan. In other words, he's an independent. And under different circumstances, he could have won. A lot of people have said that. I thought he would have been fabulous because I had the opportunity to work with Ross at a multi-billion-dollar company, which was General Motors. EDS, Electronic Data Systems, was the IT side of General Motors. And I had the opportunity of connecting with him, the best leader I've ever worked around. The only person who's made the hair on the back of my head stand up. We would get together and he would start telling us stories about how he started EDS. Same concept. He was working for IBM, doing a great job for IBM. And he thought this. He said, you know, many of these places, they don't have IT departments. Why don't we, EDS, why don't we become their managed services? Why don't we handle their IT? Now, no such thing back in those days. There were not even microcomputers. It was all mainframes. And when IBM heard about it, they said, no, we don't like this idea. We're not going to let you do this. So he went off on his own and he started a company called EDS out of his trunk. First company, no. Second company, no. 10th company, no. 20th company, no. What he didn't realize was IBM was sending people ahead of him and said, do not do business with Ross. If you do business with Ross, then we may just void your warranty. Think about that for a moment from an IT perspective. And then he got to number 77. And a gentleman named Herman Lay, who can associate that name? Potato chips. Herman Lay is the founder of Lay's potato chips. He looked at it, he says, IBM actually came and said, don't do business with this guy. I'm an entrepreneur. Let me give him a chance. And the rest is history. He built a $1 billion organization. Then he sold it to General Motors for $2.5 billion. I happened to be there in Detroit. And then he stayed off for 3 years. And then he built another multi-billion-dollar company and sold it to Dell. He built everything on failure. To be able to listen to him talk about this. The reason I had the hair on my back of my head standing when he would tell us stories is because he did not let anything stop him. And so if you think about that, if you think about those two men and the concept of looking at failure in a different way, welcoming failure, absorbing failure, getting excited about failure, moving failure forward, and then learning from it, that's a formula for success. All success is built on failure. And so we want to embrace failure. We want to make friends of failure. We want to be close to failure because we know it's helping us grow. One of my favorite women is Mother Cabrini. And I'll just give you a small snapshot of Mother Cabrini. She was born in 1850. 1850. Think about that. 8 weeks premature. Now, in those days, that was a death sentence. 8 weeks, 2 months premature in 1850, not 1950, in 1850. And so everybody kind of gave up on her, and they put her in her place. They took care of her. They babied her and all of this. And at one point she says, no, I want to be a nun. She went to the diocese and says, I want to volunteer. They said, no. I want to volunteer. They said, no. I want to volunteer. They said, no. So she started her own diocese. She actually worked with the Pope, met with the Pope. And the Pope said to her, you're too frail. And one of her responses was, I can either serve my frailty or I can serve my purpose, but I can't serve both. And so she went on to found 67 organizations in New York, South America, Central America, all headed by women. And she made a huge impact. And by the way, 67 is such an interesting number because she died at 67 when they thought she might live into her teen years. She might live at 25 and 30, and they kept pushing that. And she lived 67 fruitful, amazing years through all the failures. I'm giving you a small snapshot of what the failure was. I want you to imagine a woman in early 1900s going to New York and going to New York City and saying, I'm here, I'm going to build. And the mayor saying, no, the archdiocese says, no, we don't want women. All of those things. If you want a great movie, it's Cabrini. You can watch this actual in line. But she understood, she embraced failure. She took after it. She worked through it. She embraced it, right? If you think about that from an overall perspective. And then, of course, we're going to talk about President Lincoln. He's my favorite president, has always been. Now, I want you to think about this, right? This text right up here is just 10 out of 12 are negative. And if you look at his sweetheart dying, and by the way, this is just the face of it. Do you know that he had 4 sons? And did you know that 2 of them, one died at 4 years old, one died at 11 years old? Another one died at 18, but it was after he was assassinated. Can you imagine Mary, his wife, having to deal with assassination as well as 3 out of 4 sons? But if you study this just for a second, right, you don't have to go through all of this. A nervous breakdown, defeated for Speaker of the Illinois House, defeated for nomination to Congress. I want you to explore a thought. What if President Lincoln didn't exist? Who would have had the courage to fight that war and lose 700,000 people? Pause on that for just a second. Was it the next president? Would he or she have the courage to stand up and go after it and put the troops out there. There's a lot more defeat behind this. He had generals who were close to closing up battles that wouldn't do it. At one point, in both parties disliked him, did not get along with him. Lots of people hated him. And of course, we all know that he got assassinated. But for his persistence, for his view on failure, he kept going. This right here is 30 years, almost 30 years, 28 years. From that first concept down to the bottom is almost 30 long years. And so it gives you that opportunity to see that. And what I'm here to do is to challenge us, right? I asked this already, what's your last greatest gut-wrenching failure? And I challenge us all to look at it from that perspective where it's a friend of ours. And if we understand that failure is on this side of success, and we keep going after it, keep doing it, keep working through it. So that's the concept here. So I'm going to go through a few slides and I look for, so hopefully I've helped you look at failure from a different perspective as a friend, as something you can embrace. And I want to look through some neuroscience. What I did was I asked some of the other search engines, what are some of the latest, greatest concepts on failure? And so here's a neurobiology of productive versus destructive failure. So I'm just going to give you 5 tips as we wrap up here. And so I want you to consider not all failure triggers the same neural pathways. All a neural pathway is a path where if you do it enough, it will move everything out and it'll become automatic for you. It'll become autonomous for you. That's how athletes remember things. They create neural pathways. That's how great speakers, they create neural pathways. And so the finding is that, and then we have the concept of failure itself is neutral. Its impact is determined by the emotional and psychological context in which it occurs. And so simply you can say, how do I look at failure? Do I look at it from a friend perspective? Do I look at it as a necessity? Do I look at it as something, a learning experience? Or do I kick the table and get mad and get angry about it? So the latest things are saying it's not all equal. Excuse me. So you want to ensure that you're looking at failure in the most productive way. The failure spectrum and nuanced responses. Finding moving beyond binary, success, failure, research emphasizes spectrum. In other words, here's failure, here's success. It's a spectrum. And so if I lost 4 pounds and I wanted 4, it may be right over here in this spectrum. So if you understand that it is a spectrum, over here, what's over here? Not even trying. I want to lose 5 pounds. I didn't exercise. I didn't do anything. That's over here. But it's a spectrum. And so if you look at it from that perspective, profound thought, treating a minor mistake like a catastrophic failure, reaction, or vice versa, overreaction, underreaction is deeply damaging. So I want you to embrace failure, but realize that if you look at it in the incorrect way, that it's going to hamper you. It's going to shy away. That's why you'll see people who fail one time and they never try again. They fail on a date. Oh, that's it. I'm not going to go on any more dates. They went after an elected office and they lost that office. So I'm not going to do that anymore, because they're looking at failure in the wrong way, in my opinion. And some of the neuroscience that's out there, right? Neuroscience. This is the newest, latest, greatest concepts here for just a moment. Existential reframing, failure as data of the real. So let's explain that. Failure provides unique access to reality as it is, not as we wish or model it to be. It punctures illusions until you extend yourself out, until you push the boundaries, until you don't know where center of gravity is, until you push yourself out. And I want you to consider that, right? On the other side of failure is success, if you think about it from an overall perspective. And then It's an encounter with the limits of our current understanding and control, source of wisdom and humility. But you have to fail. You have to fail. Now, I can tell you, Al, I've failed in business several times, but it never stopped me from continuing to go on. It's an opportunity to learn. So think about this existential reframing, failure as data of the real. Vulnerability paradox. Counterintuitive leaders who authentic. This is a big one, by the way. I want you to consider this, who share their own past failures and uncertainties, increase psychological safety, trust, and team learning more effectively. In other words, on the way here, one of my friends called me. He's having a child. And he said, my kids are in their 30s. And he said, Al, if you could have your kids again, over again, and you started from young, what would you do differently than you did this time? And I said, absolutely, I would have taught them my failures. I would have sat there and said, Jake, Kalela, here's what I did in business, and here's where it went really, really well, and here's where it didn't go so well, and here's the 3 reasons why. I want to teach the kids that. I would have done that. I didn't do that. So what this is saying here is that if leadership would share their failures, like you and me, we're all leaders in this room. If we would share our failures, you're going to be so much more impactful. And so permission to fall isn't enough. Modeling the process of failing, learning, and persisting is the most powerful catalyst. And in Japan, they have the study of failure. And it is pioneered in Japan. They study. It's called systems type thinking, where they're looking at it all. They're not just looking at a failure point. This is a study of failure. And this failure point right here is actually influenced by so many other things. And Japan is doing that study and working through that. So they look at the entire failure landscape. And so I want to encourage you to take the adaptive mind, seek potential out of the comfort zone. Comfort zone for me is 3 feet around me. I want you to explore stepping out of it. And then embrace failure. It's actually a good thing, and learn from failure. Lots of invaluable lessons. And it's a short poem that I got from chat and myself. I edited it to drive home the point. What do we do with failure? What do you do when the world says no? When dreams fall flat and progress is slow? Do you shrink, retreat, and curse the cost, or rise again with all you've lost? What do you do when the path gets rough, when prayers feel weak and grit's not enough? Do you bury your hope in a grave of regret, or turn that pain into power and rise with no net? Abraham Lincoln you defeat, elections lost, businesses beat, but still he stood, tattered and tested, and kept walking till freedom rested. They told Mother Cabrini no to China, not your mission, not your time, but heaven retreated her weary feet, and she built miracles street by street. Ross Perot heard 77 no's, but still he rose as the giant grows. Colonel Sanders fried through rejection and scorn, his deep dream, deep battered, but proudly reborn. And me? I've lost more than I care to share, fired and forgotten, broke beyond repair, homeless, hurting, yet somehow whole, still forging ahead with a fire in my soul. So what do we do with failure, my friends? We don't let it crush us and let it begin. For every fall is a forging flame that shapes our souls and etches our name. So Toastmasters, Speakers Bureau, fail forward faster.